welcome to Brain Chat. I'm Dr. Mitzi Joy Williams, your board-certified neurologist and MS specialist, and my mission is to engage, educate, and empower those affected by MS to become an active part of their healthcare team. Here on Brain Chat, we'll be discussing all things MS, health and wellness, advocacy, and we'll even throw a little bit of music and music therapy in there as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for the next episode. Hello, hello, hello. Happy Monday, everyone. It's Dr. Mitzi, the nerdy neurologist, and I am so excited to be back with you all for another episode of Brain Chat. I'm super excited about the topic that we're going to discuss tonight because I'm very passionate about research. So I've got some amazing guests on here to talk about research and how it involves you and how you can get involved. And so many of the different aspects of research. So really, really excited to have them tonight. Thank you for all of those in the Atlanta area that came out to the first roundtable discussion sponsored by the Joy Life Foundation. It was a huge success, and we look forward to doing this type of programming in more markets around the country. So looking forward to meeting you at a city near you. You know how we do when you're on Brain Chat. Just log in, type in the chat. Let us know where you're logging in from. I'm bidding you greetings from Atlanta, Georgia. And I hope that you all will get something out of this time that you spend with us tonight. So let's go ahead and get the party started because I've got some great guests. And I know that this discussion is going to get so good that we're going to have trouble probably cutting off toward the end. So we'll start with Sheila Thorne. She is the president and CEO of Multicultural Healthcare Marketing Group. She's recognized as a leading expert in multicultural healthcare marketing. She spent nearly 3 decades designing and implementing not only health education, but also media and marketing campaigns focused on communities of color. She's represented the top 50 pharma and biotech companies throughout North America, Latin America, and based in London. She's worked on multinational programs. She is a New Yorker, and she has worked on recruitment and retention of diverse populations in 14 clinical trials across a broad range of therapeutic categories. She has worked with the NIH, the NIMH. She's lectured at universities. I mean, she is amazing, guys. She is a daughter and sister of nurses and very passionate about increasing access and achieving healthcare equality for all. And that definitely shines through every time I have a discussion with her. I'm so excited to be with her tonight. And then also Dr. Annette Okai, one of my favorite fellow nerdy neurologists, who is a fellowship-trained multiple sclerosis expert. She is the medical director. She is, a diplomate of the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, and she is in a new clinical practice right outside of Dallas, where she is the director of neuroimmunology. All right, welcome, Sheila, and
Hello.
welcome, Dr. Okai. Welcome to Brain Chat, ladies.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Williams. It's always an honor and a pleasure, and thank you for giving me the opportunity of sharing what I've learned on my journey.
Awesome.
Thank you for
and Dr.
having
Okai.
me.
Absolutely. Please share with us your affiliation one more time. I had an outdated bio here.
So I am director of neuroimmunology and multiple sclerosis research at North Texas Institute of Neurology and associate clinical professor at Texas Tech Health Sciences in Lubbock, Texas.
Awesome. Okay, so I have got the experts here. So listen, you guys know how excited I get about research. So I am just raring to dig into this topic today. All right. But first, before we get started, you guys know when you first come on Brain Chat, I always like to talk about kind of how you got into this space and how you got interested in working in the field of research. I always think of myself as a reluctant researcher because I recall a time in my career where I was not interested at all. And now my whole life revolves around research, which I find very ironic, but also very rewarding. So Sheila, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in research and marketing for clinical trials.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Williams. And thank you again for keeping this on the front burner of your Brain Chat because it is so critically important. Really, my entree into clinical research was kind of serendipitous. I didn't really focus and choose it. It kind of came by the wayside as I began to work with my pharmaceutical clients. the first question I would always ask them about any new product is, how many people of color were in the clinical trials? And then there was dead silence.
Right.
And they often would say, well, we had some, but they would never give it a number. And that was troubling to me because I knew that if physicians wanted to know if drugs were safe and effective in everyone, you had to get everyone in the trials. So I started talking to them about, what's the problem? Why aren't you able to recruit and retain people of color? And again, silence. But here we are now, post COVID-19, kind of, sort of, and people are obviously now more aware of the value of clinical research. And so I'm getting calls all the time about, how do we do a better job? It's no longer just a nice thing to do, it's now mandated by the FDA. You've
Yep.
got to
Yeah.
include it in your clinical trials. So I'm excited about this opportunity, this watershed moment, so that I can
Yes.
come to the table and suggest to them ways that you can do a better job of being more effective in product development. And that's been my kind of entree. I sit at the table and I challenge them. Why don't you have more people of color in clinical trials? What's the problem? Is it language? Is it culture? What is it? And I'm
Right.
finding out that it's lack of diversity education. They don't understand the culture. Language they get, Dr. Williams and Dr. Okai, they don't get culture.
Mm.
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 Listen, you are preaching to the choir. You hear us already like, yes, yes. This. All right. So, Dr. Okai, tell us a little bit about your interest in the field.
So I think in undergrad, I had an opportunity to do a molecular research, working with rats, and I really didn't like it. I'm like, oh no, this is not for me. But when I entered neurology residency, my mentor kind of gradually introduced me to clinical research.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of gravitated towards it, especially where MS was. So my interest in that grew exponentially, knowing, oh, it's not all about and lab animals. There's a different side to research, and we'll speak to that when we talk about the different type of research. So I went into it gradually, and when I started on my own as a physician, I have to do clinical research because
Mm-hmm.
I started from as a resident, went into fellowship, and coming up, there's no way I couldn't do it. And Mitzi, we call ourselves twins. We went through a fellowship together,
We
and we
did.
started we started at the same time, rather, and we started this journey asking the same question, Sheila:
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
how many people? Well, we got stonewalled. We got, even to get the numbers were,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God, what do you want to do with it? And, like we were trying to get something out of Fort Knox.
Mm.
That's how many numbers were in there. And so we persevere. We've been through this journey for a long time in
Mm-hmm.
MS,
Yeah.
and we started to gain a little bit of traction
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
pre-COVID, yeah,
Mm.
about 2 or 3 years, but then it really opened up
Mm-hmm.
during COVID to say, look, things are, we haven't been exaggerating all this time.
Right.
Even to get a paper out on
Mm.
the number of people in research, or how many people and how they responded, it
Mm-hmm.
was pulling tooth and nail to do that.
Right.
But we have to continue to stick with it, and we have to keep our foot on the pedal to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that this isn't a flash in the pan and it's a lasting thing, because
Mm-hmm.
we're not going anywhere. And people of color are now being diagnosed at way higher rates
Mm-hmm.
than they were in the past. So we
Yeah.
have to continue to be inclusive of them, so that what we are doing and the drugs we are prescribing for our
Mm-hmm.
patients
Mm-hmm.
reflects what it says that are in all across all population.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mu- Music to my hearts to hear you,
Yes.
Black
I mean,
physician, talk like this. Wow.
yeah, and I love, the conversation because, Annette and I did come out of training at the same time, and people would ask us to do all these programs, during February, it's Black History Month, and then we would go to the literature to try to find evidence about MS and populate, and it just wasn't there. I
Right.
always talk about how I could fit every article written in English about Black people with MS in a 3-ring binder. And I literally could reread my 3-ring binder almost every year before I gave another program. And there might
Mm,
be one or two additional articles, but there just wasn't a lot of information around there.
that's
And
exactly.
then when we think about diversity and research, certainly, this is Black History Month. We focus a lot on Black populations, but there are also many other underrepresented populations
Mhm,
in research, right? We think about Native Americans, we think about Asian Pacific Islanders, we think
mhm,
about the Hispanic Latino community, even if we think about people in rural populations, right? There are
mhm.
lots of groups that need to be included because it's just good science, right?
Exactly.
And because we want to make sure that whatever we're developing really accurately reflects the people that we're trying to reach,
That's
because
exactly.
people are asking, well, what about me? Were there people that look like me in these studies? So let's kind of take a step back for a second and talk about the different types of research, because oftentimes when we talk about research, many people's minds automatically go to clinical trials, and they are a very major part of research that we definitely need diversity in. But why don't we start with you, Annette? Tell us a little bit about some of the different types of research that people can be involved in. And then, Sheila, if you could tell us some about some of the types of projects that you have worked on as well.
Okay.
So, as you said, Mitzi, people minds readily go to clinical trial where you're in a study and they are investigating a new compound. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that's a big part of clinical research, and we certainly encourage that. And but there are different types. Like I mentioned before, the way I started in research was gradually, and
Mm-hmm.
then I increase my knowledge and move on. Because if I was just going to go into a lab to learn research, I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't interested. So different types of research. One, it can be observational.
Mhm,
So
Mm-hmm.
there are observational study where you are just being observed for different character traits. And
Mm-hmm.
it nothing required on your part, probably going to the doctor, doing a physical exam, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Another type of research can be a registry. And
Mm-hmm.
Mitzi, you have talked about the African American registry on here multiple times, where your information based on your reporting is
Mm-hmm.
then used to analyze what's going on in the community. So
Mm-hmm.
this is not interventional. You are not getting a pill, you
mhm,
are not getting any kind of investigative compound.
mhm,
Another type of research is, okay, you could be giving blood, and we are examining your blood to see why do people of color have this reaction to certain
Mm-hmm.
medication. That's another way. Once again, you are not getting a compound to ingest that you don't know of.
mhm,
So those are several different types of research. And then you come to the clinical trials part. And this
Mm-hmm.
is also important. So some people are hesitant because, oh, I'm getting something, I don't know what I'm getting.
mm,
I'm being tested on. But these things have been tested way in what we call preclinical phases. But
mhm,
it's important for us to be involved in this stage as well,
mhm,
because we can pick up what we call safety signals early on. So if there's an issue in a certain group, we pick it up during the clinical trial and not wait until the medication comes on the market and then all of a sudden there's a recall or do not use in this population because there are issues or it doesn't work as effectively. So so while people, as I said, are hesitant about that, there are lots of other ways to dip your toe in the pool just to get started. Registries, observational studies, and sometimes even the medication that has been approved and is prescribed to you by your physician. There are studies on that. People are looking for safety, long-term data. If
Mm-hmm.
you're going to take the medication anyway, can you fill out a few surveys? Can you answer a few questions? Or can you donate blood and see what is going on? So, for anyone who is hesitant to think about clinical trials, I'll say look at other types and see what fits you before you take the leap. And then there are some people who embrace it enthusiastically, and we are appreciative of those people. But like Sheila mentioned earlier, education is key. We have to
Hmm.
educate the community about why we are talking about this and why we're making this a focus, because we need representation. So we talk about representation in everything else, in the boardroom, at in the C-suite. We need
Right.
representation as well.
Mhm.
Sheila.
Yes, that was a great overview, Dr. Okai. And I always call it for going from molecule to market. So you've
Mhm.
got to figure out how that molecule is going to impact people who don't look like you, who don't
Right.
come from where you come from, who don't speak the
Right.
language you speak, in terms of dosing, compliance, side effects.
Mhm.
All of
Mhm.
those things have been scientifically documented, are different
Right.
in people of different cultural backgrounds. The only thing I'll add to Dr. Okai's great overview is the kind of observational study, one that I'm working on right now in mental health, which also has its own stigmas attached to it in communities of color.
Mhm.
They're trying to find out what is the solution or the best therapy. Is it talk therapy? Is it
Mhm.
pharmacological? Or is it both? So
Mhm.
that's kind of a survey trying to search for what works best. And this is with youth of color. And so clearly that's a dynamic that many people don't think about. But
Mhm.
doctors, what I often suggest to community is full disclosure, complete transparency.
Right.
Nobody's going to jump into a trial just because you need a participant. They've got to understand totally what's the day in the life like if I
Right.
participate in this clinical trial, from when I go through my tests, when I'm actually approved, and then where does it go from there? And those times are challenging for people of color. So we
Right.
have to really look carefully, not only recruiting, but retaining people of color in the trials so you can have the outcomes that you want. So I've run the gamut. Most of it has
Yeah.
been with new drugs, new
Mhm.
devices,
Right.
investigational drugs,
Mhm.
phase 3, where that's when you're about to go out into market. So, but there are many types, and we need to just educate the community on letting them know why this is necessary, valuing their participation. Because, they
Right.
always say those folks are hard to reach. No, no, no,
Right.
no.
Mhm.
They're hardly reached.
Mhm.
Okay.
Exactly. They're
And
not
so
asked.
they're not as so, and
Mhm.
the PIs definitely need to be of color. The site teams need to have people of color linguistically as well as culturally. So we've got
Yeah.
to start from the bottom up and fix this,
Absolutely.
because what's happening now is
Absolutely.
unacceptable, totally unacceptable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I love this discussion because, there are so many different ways. I think about, I used to do a lot of research even before I used to do a lot of market research. I remember, people would call the house and I would go try on different jeans and all this other kind of, just I was always very interested in being involved in research, and we don't realize that we are actually involved in research all the time when people do those market surveys. We
True.
just have to take it a step forward and think about your health care, right? And living with chronic conditions, it's
Mm,
so much more important for us to have, not more, but it's very important for us to have that representation, because we're
mm,
talking about things that could affect people's livelihoods, their ability to function. With a disease like
exactly.
MS, we're talking about your brain or your spine. There's a lot at stake, right?
Yes.
When we
Mhm.
don't know how things affect populations differently. You're going to say something, Dr. Okay.
Yeah, I was saying we are involved in research all the time when
All the
we are on
time.
TikTok,
Mm,
when we are
Right.
mm,
on Instagram, even our emails, when the data is collected
mhm,
and
Right.
is used for market research.
mhm.
Absolutely.
So, putting all those comments, all those videos, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Snapchat, and then you got your Outlook email, your Gmail email, everything.
Mhm.
It's being scanned, it's
Yes.
Right.
being it's being analyzed, and
Sure.
you're not even well, you give consent because you're using the product,
Right.
but did you
Hmm.
give specific consent for
Mhm.
how they
Right.
use it?
Right.
So we have to take it to a different level.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Mhm.
and we use research and we do our own research all the time, right? And again,
Mhm.
I try to think about how do we apply this to our everyday life, right? If you're looking for a
Mm,
car, right? If you're looking for a hair dryer and how it works on certain
mhm,
hair or certain
mhm.
makeup or beauty lines, all of that is research that you have to go look up to see how that affects you, right? So
Yes.
likewise, again, when we think about something as important as medications and therapies that can affect the course of your life. Just
Mhm.
like you want to know how that hair dryer, if that makeup, or if that laser treatment is for you, we also need to know if these medications and other interventions are for you. So when
Right.
we think about kind of the issue, right? So obviously we know that there's an issue with diversity and
Mhm.
many people do know, but let's kind of talk about, I like numbers. Like what is the state of diversity in our clinical research? Like why is this so imperative? And
Mhm.
I'll have you start, Sheila, from like a
Mhm.
broader sense, and then Annette, I want you to talk more specifically about some of the statistics and some of our understanding as it pertains to MS research.
Yes, I think the numbers definitely tell the story because
Hmm.
clearly under 5% of these populations are enrolled in clinical trials compared to the
Right,
mainstream populations. And that number has stayed the same over the years.
right,
It's had
right,
its highs and its lows, but it stays the same. So there's something not happening in these communities that we need to take a look at. However, when the COVID-19 vaccine trials were taking place, it's the closest I've ever seen to coming to the proportionate number in the population. So we did something different there. And
right.
so we've got to take a look at what are the key learnings from that. Obviously, COVID-19 had a dramatic impact. People were dying by
Hmm.
the thousands every day. So it got
Hmm.
folks' attention. MS may not be that dramatic. Diabetes may not be that dramatic, but we've got to create an urgency
Hmm.
around the clinical research piece in that you need to be included in that, even from the protocol development.
Right,
What's
Yes.
the inclusion exclusion criteria? I could,
right.
doctors, I could take a look at that and tell them in a minute, you're gonna have to find these black folks on another planet. Okay. I
Not
just don't
another
even say
planet.
that.
Not
Okay.
another
I,
planet.
I don't know where you're gonna find these folks when you excluded almost everything.
Everything.
Yes.
Yes,
I said so.
exactly.
So I'm not a scientist as you ladies are, but my question is, does it have to be that stringent for
Right.
you to come with the right outcomes and the clinical data? I think we've got to challenge those
Yes.
things so that we're
Yes.
more inclusive and make it a little bit lessening the burden of being in that clinical trial. And so
Yes.
it's from A to Z. You've got to start from the very beginning.
Because we act like as scientists that people are doing us a favor. Like
Yes.
no, 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 we act like we're doing them a favor by
Mm,
allowing them to volunteer to
yeah.
be in these research studies when actually they are doing the favor and the service to the scientific community. And we really need to renovate. I agree with you 100%, Sheila, the way that we're thinking about this, because we really act like, I mean, and so we are offering a service, right? It is very good cutting edge care, but really they are
Sure.
volunteering of their own free will. And we have to make it
Yeah.
easier and more accessible for the
There you
people who are
go.
taking their time out to participate and contribute
Yes.
to the scientific community. So what about
Yes.
MS specifically, Annette? Tell us about some of the our understanding of, how MS affects certain populations and how diverse or lack of diversity there is evident in our clinical research.
All right. So, this disease has been around for over 150 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And it was always thought people of color weren't affected.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I mean, people were misdiagnosed because, like, oh, you're black or you're Hispanic, you can't have
Mm-hmm.
MS. And then all of a sudden, we start to see more people of color
Mm.
being diagnosed, but that is not being reflected in our clinical trials. And I mean,
Mm-mm.
from the early trials, we could count on our hands the
Hmm.
number of black patients or the number of Hispanic patients in that. The
Like
number is still
10, like
below
multiple trials had
5%.
10, 5,
Mm-hmm.
10
Yeah.
people
Yes.
Yeah.
in a
Mm-hmm.
phase
And
3 clinical trial.
in a phase three out of hundreds, almost 1,000. And that percentage, like you said, have moved slightly, but not a whole lot, still
No.
under 5%.
Mm-hmm.
What is the issue? Sheila,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, we have to start from the bottom up. And there's a comment in here that, about we need to recruit PIs in
Yes.
these community and we need to
Mm-hmm.
partner them with the academic center. Like you
Mhm.
said, where are you going to find those people when you look at the criteria, right?
Yes,
Right.
yes,
Yes. Well,
yes.
we don't have to go off the planet for them. But take a typical academic center. They have a resident clinic where, people are sent, and then they have the actual, attending clinic. Well, who's in
Mhm.
the
Mm-hmm.
resident clinic? People
Mm,
of color. They do not have access
that's
to
right.
those trials because the resident turnover is, very frequent, and they
Exactly.
get
Mm-hmm.
lost in the fold. Or
Mhm.
they're in the county hospital and trials aren't being conducted there. But who's
Mhm.
conducting the trials? Who's running the county hospital? The academic center where trials are being conducted.
Mhm.
So we have to bridge that gap
Mhm.
as
Mm-hmm.
to where it is. MS at where it is right now, we're seeing incidence and prevalence increasing in this cohort people of color,
Mhm.
and we have to match it because we have been burned before, where
Mm.
we thought, this medication approved for MS is great, and then after it came to market after a few years, it was, oh, it
Hmm.
is not as effective
Mm.
as we thought in this population versus the other.
Mhm.
Imagine if we had even 5% in that clinical trial, we would have noticed it early on instead
Mhm.
of
Mm-hmm.
putting everyone on the same treatment. It's not one size fit all. and
Exactly. Exactly.
so and so we have to continue to do that, and
Mhm.
look at, like you said, the inclusion exclusion criteria when it comes to the real world. Those aren't the criteria that we're using. We are
Mm.
So
putting people on.
what is inclusion exclusion criteria? Can you break that
Okay,
down a little
so
bit
to
for the audience?
elaborate on that, what in a clinical trial, you have to meet certain criteria to be included, or if you have certain other issues, you are excluded. For an example, MS specifically, most of our trials are relapsing remitting.
Mm.
So for most of our relapsing remitting trials, you have to be able to walk without a cane.
Mm.
Well, if we look at the black and brown population, because the disease is more progressed and aggressive, even people who are relapsing remitting are using a cane.
Mm.
Right.
Does that make them any a progressive patient? No. It's just
Mhm.
that the disease is more aggressive and they need an assisted device earlier on.
Mhm.
But if you are using a cane, you cannot be included in this trial. And I'm
Yes.
seeing this as a general thing, right?
Yes.
It's just an
Yes.
example. So we already know the disease people advance to cane more quickly in this population, but they're still having inflammation. Why are you excluding them?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Correct.
And when it
Absolutely.
comes to the market, we
Mhm.
are going to put those same people on the medication.
That's
So, in
exactly.
Right.
inclusion criteria, you have to walk this distance without a cane, without resting to be included. An
Mhm.
exclusion criteria is that you are using a cane, so you are excluded from the trial.
That's
So
right.
we have to re-examine
Yes.
how we look at our data. We have to think outside of the box.
That's it.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's very for clinical trials. We are making adjustments and redefining things all the time,
Mhm.
but we
Absolutely.
have not looked at the clinical trial process itself.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
We
Yes.
have not looked at the processes of the same thing we've been doing for years and
Years.
years.
Yes.
We continue to do it. And then you
Mhm.
come and
Right.
say, oh, help me recruit Black people. Oh, sorry.
Right.
I'm going
So
to stop there.
and then what happens is everything is created, right? All
Mhm.
the sites and places are chosen, all the
Mhm.
investigators are chosen, and then they call and say, "Oh, well, now we've done everything. Now tell us how to make it more diverse." And it's like, "Well,
Hmm.
You,
everything
you,
is done."
you set them
So
up.
I don't
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't fix after everything is done, you know.
That's right.
So
That's right.
I think that we have to be intentional about thinking about this from the beginning.
Absolutely.
And I love what you were saying, Annette, about inclusion and exclusion criteria, because oftentimes, you know, those results and the way that those studies are done then inform the availability of these treatments
Mm,
to certain groups of people.
mhm,
So,
Yep.
mhm.
particularly with MS, most of our trials only go to the age of 55. So,
Well,
what do I do with the 60-year-old patient who is relatively
mhm,
young, who has MS,
mhm,
and some
mhm,
company says, well, they don't fit this criteria. Or
Mhm.
if I have someone who maybe can't walk very well,
mhm,
but they are working and they're using their chair and their arms are
mhm.
working fine. Does that mean that because you can't use your legs, that we shouldn't preserve your arms and your brain? Like that doesn't make
Exactly.
sense. Right.
It
So we
doesn't.
have to really think that these things not only inform how we understand side effects, but understand who these treatments are available to and what we really understand about how they work.
Exactly.
Before we talk about solutions, because I know we got some good stuff and we've mentioned some things about solutions, I do want to take a pause here and I want to talk for a minute about the benefits of research. So we're like,
Yes.
okay, everybody needs to be in the trial. You got to get in the trial. You got to get in research. But what are the benefits that people get out of being involved in clinical research? And I'll start with you, Sheila, and then I'll go to you, Annette.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Williams. Your work has helped educate me on MS more than anything else. Your videos, your writing, all of that. So kudos to you for
Thank
taking
you.
stepping out on that, because that's
Great
helped
job.
me. Yeah, it's excellent. I always go to her first, and get the real deal. Um, but the
Thank you.
benefits are really what I emphasize when I talk to community groups about clinical studies. And sometimes that word clinical trials is a little off-putting too,
Mm,
because trials kind of speaks to experimentation. And
right.
because of the history of our country, people of color really don't like being guinea pigs or lab rats, as we often hear
Right.
them say. However, when I talk about the benefits of the personalized attention you will get by being in this clinical study with the site team, knowing that everybody is really focused on you, helping you to see that your journey in this clinical study is very important to them. So that's one that attracts people. And the one that
Mhm.
really gets people of color is it's not only going to help you and your family, but the community.
Yeah.
We're
Absolutely.
Yep.
very, very keen on
Hmm.
how we as a people going to be improved by this clinical study. Those two things really get people when you tell them about your participation is going to be far reaching in terms of its impact. And so those two things I have learned are really what enables the conversation to proceed. So again, lessening the burden, transparency. And Dr.
Yeah.
Okai talked about the upfront piece. If you meet the criteria, that's just the beginning. You may
That's
have to
just the
go
beginning.
through 4 to 6 weeks of diagnostic tests to see whether you really are eligible for this trial.
Yeah.
So what's that?
Mhm.
What that means you're going to do in 4 to 6 weeks, and at the end of which you might say, you know what, you're not eligible.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean that leads. It's kind of deflating, if you will, but it's
Absolutely.
necessary. So that's 6 weeks. Childcare, work, all of those things you have to juggle in
Hmm.
order to be officially in this trial. And then don't let
Mm.
me get started about the informed consent document. Okay.
Oh, yes.
Mm.
That
Mhm.
50
40 to
pages.
50 page document, and I'm supposed to go through every page, and the site coordinator will say, do you understand? Okay, initial that. Do you understand? I mean, come on. I mean, so clearly when you look at marginalized communities, this is all new to them. So it clearly has to be taken patiently. And talk about the MS situation with using a cane. I've worked on clinical trials where there was a literacy criteria. You've got to
Mm.
reach the 10th grade reading level. Well, who came up with
Wow.
that? Okay.
Wow.
And you've got to be documented. I mean, there's a whole list of things that
Mm.
automatically excludes large numbers of people. But that's a
Yeah.
systemic problem. We have to
Yeah.
challenge those things. Is that absolutely necessary for a
Right.
person to be in the trial? So I think that's something that, as PIs and as scientists, that's why I look to you to say, I don't think so. This is not going to work. And the two things that pharmaceutical companies hate to hear is trial takes longer and costs more. Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
But
And
that's what it takes to
that's
do
the reality.
inclusive
Yeah.
research.
Yeah.
So you got to be in it for the long haul. Okay. This
Or
is
you
like
either
Absolutely.
be
pay
there one day.
upfront or pay way later.
That's right.
Exactly.
Pay me now
Somewhere
or
the
pay me
money's
later.
gonna
You're
come.
going to
Yeah.
pay.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
What are your thoughts on that? What are some other potential benefits of research?
So the benefits I like to point first, I totally agree with Sheila. Community engagement, community information, it helps the community overall, and that's why
Mhm.
we're speaking to this. But another thing I like to point out is you have access to cutting edge
Mm,
technology.
mm,
Absolutely.
Cutting edge technology. That is important. Look, all through phases of research, it has to have gone through very different stages to reach into the stage where it's now open to hundreds of people. And
mhm,
there are people clamoring, but it's cutting edge technology. You have access to that. Um, Personalized, I tell people, you see me more in a
mhm.
clinical trial than you see me just as a patient.
Right.
So personal, every aspect of your health is being looked at.
Mhm.
So whatever you're experiencing, if you stub your toe, I have to record that. And
Mm,
so the level of involvement is so
mhm.
high that you wouldn't get that just on your insurance,
Exactly.
or just seeing your primary care doctor.
Mhm,
Another benefit that I like to think, but I don't use that as a selling tool for clinical trial, is that MS is an expensive disease,
mm,
Hmm.
right? So you have MRIs, you have labs, you have days off from work. It is an expensive disease. And while trial can be sometimes burdensome in terms of time commitment, and we'll get to that Mitzi, I think,
mhm,
but also think about the other side. You are not paying for MRIs, which you get frequently,
mhm,
in a clinical trial. Imagine you go and get an MRI
mhm,
and your deductible is $1,200.
mm,
Well, even I'm gonna balk at paying $1,200 out of my pocket when I have kids, or I have to
mhm,
pay toll to work and all of that.
mhm,
So
mhm.
that's
Hmm.
free. Labs are free. Most almost nothing comes out of your pocket for that.
That's
But
right.
that's
Hmm.
not an enticement.
Correct.
But we
Correct.
never use that as an enticement, but as something to think about as well.
Yes.
Right.
So
Yes.
the personalized care, community information, cutting edge technology,
Mhm.
those are things that you have and then, you know, who knows, you may be doing it for you are doing it for future generations down the
Mhm.
line.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. Absolutely. So I agree with all of those things. And in terms of personalized care, I mean, you have a lot of eyes on you
Yes.
very frequently. They're the nurses, the
Mhm,
coordinators. You
mhm,
have the primary investigator, who is the doctor who's kind of heading up the trial. You usually have a blinded person who's another doctor that's
mm.
doing an exam on you. So people are monitoring very closely. So if there's something going wrong, it's going to be addressed, right? You're not going to be sitting there waiting 5 weeks for somebody to call you
Mhm,
back, right? The
mhm.
responses are
Exactly.
very quickly. There are protocols in place to make sure that things are addressed. And I think the other piece, is that, if something happens, you can get out, right? So it's not
Yes.
Yes,
like
Yes.
you
signing this
can
sentence
withdraw
where,
consent.
yes,
Exactly.
so it's not like you're
Exactly.
signing this sentence, what you get in, like, there's no
That's
way out. There
right.
are protocols. If there are
Mhm.
issues with whatever treatment or intervention you have and that's not working, there is a way out to get you the appropriate treatment, right?
That's
So
right.
Yes.
nobody's
That's
going to
right.
sit there and let someone suffer and continue to do worse if
Exactly.
whatever treatment or intervention they're on is not working. So I
Exactly.
always like to make sure that we also discuss the benefits, right? Because we tell
Mhm,
people the
mhm,
importance, why they should do it, but there are
mhm.
many benefits. Research is not a bad thing, right? We need
No.
to renovate the way that we do it so that it's
Mhm,
even more accessible to more people. But there are
mhm.
many benefits to being involved in research if you're able to do so.
That's right.
And you guys have mentioned most of the major ones. So we've got a little time left. So we're coming toward the end of the program, but let's
Already?
talk about. I know. I knew this was going to happen. I should have done a part one and
Time
part two with
flies.
you ladies.
Right.
I may have you come back and do a part two, but let's talk about solutions, right? So,
Okay.
we know we can't boil the ocean, but what are some practical things that need to happen to help solve this problem? I'm very excited about some things that are being done. Annette and I are involved in the Chimes trial, which is a trial focused on Black and Hispanic
Mhm,
American people with MS. And there were some really cool things we did with the way that we created the protocol, working
mhm,
directly with patients and advocacy organizations
mhm.
to make sure we could get people recruited and make sure we had the right language and we were setting the right tone. But let's talk a little bit about kind of some of the top line things that need to happen to help solve this problem. So I've heard you talk a lot about challenging, Sheila, which I love that word. But tell
Mhm.
us kind of some of your top line things that you think are most important to help move the needle forward.
Well, definitely. I think the number one, in my opinion, would be targeted geographies. The
Mm,
sponsors of clinical trials always go back to the same centers because they have track record with them, they know
Yeah.
them, and there's a comfort level there.
right,
Unfortunately, many of those centers are not accessible to people of color. So
right,
transportation becomes an issue,
right.
familiarity. So I think you should look at where the sites are that you
Mm,
want to gather people in the traditional sense of going to sites. Number two, partnerships. If you have no one on your team that looks like the people of color, you need to gain the respect and the support of community based organizations, which
mm,
may or may not be focused on MS. They
Hmm.
just may be the trusted voices in the community. I'm doing one clinical trial in the state, and nobody at the site in the site team is of color. PI is not of color. So I'm bringing in Black nurses, Hispanic nurses. I'm bringing
Hmm.
in other community groups, NAACP, Urban League, the community colleges, so that when you do are successful in recruiting, you have some people who can come in at a time when somebody is coming to the site who looks like them. So,
right.
you're not going to increase diversity overnight. But to me, targeted geographies where the critical mass of the population exists, finding community trusted messengers and voices who can support your effort and get the word out in the community that this is a good thing, and how do you bring people in. And thirdly, most importantly, a boots on the ground approach.
Mm,
Okay. Ads and papers are great, 800 numbers are nice, but I want to have those flyers about that study in barbershops, in beauty salons, in exchange places, in bodegas, in housing projects. I want to saturate the community so that you create a buzz about this trial, so that if you or someone you know would be eligible, you spread the word. You've got to create that surround sound
Hmm.
environment, because people are
Okay.
not just going to voluntarily reach out unless they see it in church, they hear it on the radio, they get a
right,
flyer at the barbershop,
right.
they get a flyer in the Meals on Wheels with food pantries. You got to look at the community, map the community, and hit the community in as many spots as possible, so that at some point they say, I think these people are trying to get my attention about this trial. And you're going to call somebody or talk to somebody. And that to me is what I've used that really, really works.
I love those ideas. And
Mhm.
speaking to site, selection, I remember Annette and I, having this issue when we first,
Hmm.
started in this field of research. It was very hard to
Yeah.
Mhm.
get onto studies. We would
Yeah.
go to meetings, we would raise the question, what about MS in these populations? And they say, oh, that's a great idea. And then we see the paper published with somebody else's name on it. And it's like, well, really?
Well,
Wow.
I
Like,
remember
that's
us
not
fighting to get a picture of a black person on a pamphlet.
yeah,
Wow. Wow.
yeah,
Fighting.
yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
we don't think legal is going to go with that.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, so
Yes.
it's been a trip,
Oh, yeah.
but I agree wholeheartedly, right? And again, investing in sites, right, that are not at
Yes.
the large academic centers. Annette and I, have been part of larger practices and also been on our own,
Mhm.
and can be a testament to when you're kind of out there by yourself, even if you're an expert in the field,
Mhm.
it's not easy
No.
to get on the radar, to be
Mhm.
a potential site for clinical research. It can be
Mhm.
very difficult. And so investing in sites that are smaller and maybe don't have,
Mhm.
the 50-year history of being involved, but have investigators who are diverse is also very, very important.
Key.
Um,
Key.
and Annette, tell us about some of your thoughts about how we can remedy some of these issues.
So I'm glad Sheila talked about the recruitment part and the representation in the in the clinical team and all of
Mhm.
that. So I'm going to focus on the process a little
Mhm.
bit.
Hmm.
So
Right.
it was mentioned earlier on that it can be burdensome for people, especially hourly workers, people who
Mhm.
have kids and they have to think about daycare and all of that. Clinical trials takes time,
Mhm.
so several things. I think one thing COVID taught us a whole lot. It
Did.
was a horrible time, but we
Yes.
learned a whole lot. Is that things can be done remotely.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
let's change that. Why does someone have to come to the clinic for
Mm,
3 to 4 hours to draw labs, to
mm,
fill out surveys, to answer all of these questions when, bam, that's a smartphone?
mm-hmm,
Or you have the nurse go out to where they are, either
mm-hmm,
their job or their home, wherever they're comfortable, and get the blood. Okay, so that's one thing. There are certain processes within the clinical trial protocol that can be done remotely that wouldn't take up a lot of time.
Mhm.
Another thing to do is, as Mitzi, you said, these people are giving us their time. They're
mm-hmm,
doing us the favor. So
mm-hmm.
we have to account for their time as well.
Right.
Pay for child care,
Yeah.
pay for driving the distance,
Mm-hmm,
pay for hotels. So, like the Chimes trial, we made sure all of those were in place. If you're driving 400 miles, and I've had patients there, we have a hotel for you. We pay for your
mm,
transportation. If you
Mhm.
need childcare, that is covered as well. If you
mm,
need to stay late, you're not worried about that. So you
mm-hmm,
make it less burdensome for
mm-hmm,
the patient. All right,
mm-hmm,
so that's part of the process. And we look at once again the inclusion exclusion criteria. You know,
mm-hmm,
Mhm.
let's go back to kidney disease. If you have, this long outdated formula that, oh, black people have, we have to calculate their kidney function different from
mm,
the other races, when that was wrong all
mm-hmm,
along, and we were using it for 20 plus years.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
look at the metrics that you are
mm-hmm,
using as well, and not just exclude and get this pristine population for
mm,
your trial. You have to be flexible. Yes, we understand that we have to show results. We have to
mm-hmm,
show very robust results,
mm-hmm.
but we have to look at the process, change the process.
The
So
reality. Mm-hmm,
yes, making it less burdensome for
Right.
patients, making things that are in terms of time, in terms of work time, in terms of hotel distance, so people can come from the rural places to participate in trial. I have patients coming in on Thursday and
mm-hmm,
Friday. Speaking of time, I think no 40% of my patients drive over 400 miles
mm.
Mm.
Wow.
for this
Wow.
trial.
Because you're in
Yes,
Texas.
That's a
yeah,
lot.
Texas is a big
it's a
state.
big state and the surrounding states. So
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I've
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it, and Mitzi, we have made it work with this
Yes.
Right.
trial. To the point that we recruited, and our recruitment ended early.
Mm. Wow.
And this is
And we
for a
over enroll by
population,
25%.
and we
Love it.
over enroll.
Love it.
And this is in a population that people said, oh, they don't like to participate. They will not do that. Wow,
Mm.
look what happened.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
And so
so
I love
yes,
all of those suggestions. And the thing that I would add that I think about a lot is that we also have to educate our peers, our
Yes.
medical,
Oh, yes.
investigators, right? We
Mhm.
can't assume that because it is an academic center that
Right.
everyone is all knowing
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
everything, right?
Right.
And so there needs to be education to make sure that people are asking.
Mm-hmm.
I've had people say things to me about, you know, uh, well, maybe we just don't have the population to be involved in trials. And they're
Mm-hmm.
like somewhere like New York. And I'm like, really? Like, there
Oh
are
boy.
no black and
Yeah.
brown people in New York? Like, this is crazy. So I think we have to educate our peers to not assume, right? And so
Yes.
you may have had in your experience people who have said no, or people who may not have had positive responses, but that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean give up or quit
That's
asking
right.
those people, because there are many people who, despite their concerns, despite the history, want to be involved, right?
Mhm.
And so they won't know that they can be involved if we don't ask.
That's
And
exactly
so I
right.
think that that is another piece that I would add, for us, who are doing the work, is to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that we're educating the medical community,
Mm-hmm.
because many of the clinical trials, I mean, many of our academic centers are in
yes,
heavily populated urban or minority
Absolutely.
areas. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So it's not like the people aren't there. I mean, there are people
Right.
who drive long distances, but there are people in the vicinity,
Sure.
and so,
Sure.
we have to make sure that we are, not assuming that everyone knows exactly what needs to be done and is aware of some of the work that,
And
that needs to
you
happen.
have to help the site teams because, in my experience, they're very conscientious and they're very diligent, but
Hmm.
rarely do they go out in community and do
Right.
the kind of recruitment we're talking about. So find
No,
out
they
what's
do
going on.
not.
Where they
Absolutely.
don't have the
They don't.
time. They may have
Right.
the inclination, but it's a time
Right.
factor. It's labor
Absolutely.
intensive. So get the
Absolutely.
pastor of the largest Black church, you get the largest Hispanic business owner. I've been
Yeah.
working in the Native American community. Find your
Mhm.
partners. What do they do on a
Right.
regular basis so that you can get a
Right.
flyer there, a speaker there?
Yeah.
Radio is the medium of choice for people
Mhm.
of color because music is such a big part of our culture. How
Yeah.
can you include, go where the people are at? Don't create
Yeah.
something new that you have to
Mhm.
draw
Right.
people.
Right.
Piggyback on something that's there. Does that church do a health fair every once a month? You
I
know,
love it.
uh, the mobile units in the Latino community, Los Promotoras, the community health workers, drive around in the community, give them information as people wait on the corners for them to come. So
Right.
again, the opportunities are there. We've got to
Hmm.
proactively take advantage of them. You build it and people will come. No, no, you got to go and get people to come.
You got to go get the people. You build
Yeah.
and then you go get the people and bring them back.
There you go.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And but
Yeah,
it, and
I
it
love it.
works. It works.
It
It
works.
works.
I love it. Well, ladies, believe it or not, we have come to the end of our time. That fast. Looks like
Wow.
we just started talking. But just really quick, I want you to tell me about one or two projects that you're excited about, or one or two initiatives you're excited about in the field.
You want me to start? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you
Sorry,
go.
I was looking at you, Sheila, in my
Oh,
mind, but
okay.
I
I'm
didn't see
sorry.
Sheila
Uh,
first.
well, I really am excited about the 3 clinical trials that I'm working on right now because the sponsoring organization, the clinical research organization, is making a concerted effort to do it the right way. They've built
Yeah.
in money for people who really need it for transportation, etc.,
Hmm.
and for time. Because that's obviously something to think about. And what's interesting is the look of the materials. I suggest is totally different. They're not used to that.
Mm,
Mhm.
Usually the materials are pale pinks and blues and gray. No, people of color like vibrant, bold colors to catch their attention so that you can pick
mhm.
up. So, they say, well, you think that's going to work? Yep, trust me. They're going to know when you use red, black, green, and gold, that's for Black folks. Okay.
Absolutely.
Because I'm
They're
not,
like, oh, look at this.
okay, wow. And one young man, we did a test in a market. He says, I saw those colors, I picked it up, and I kept reading. His eyes kept going down to the bottom. He's, I'm going to take this to my next meeting and show folks. So that's been a very dynamic and interesting, um, uh, taking people out of their comfort zone. Don't do what you always
Hmm.
do. Don't just put a black face on a brochure and think that's
Mhm.
enough. It's not. Okay. Look right, feel right, so that I
Awesome.
know you knew I was going to pick that up.
Right.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. And what about you?
So I am glad that it's now a mandate um, for diversity and inclusion. We've been talking about MS in clinical trial as a whole, but something just came across my email regarding NMO, neuromyelitis optica, which a majority of the people are black, and you look at the brochures and they're showing people Scandinavian folks. That's a different story,
Or
but
light skinned black people. Only light skinned
yeah.
black people.
Yes, looking at, even though it seemed like a small a project right now, but registries
Mm,
for these people. I'm excited about that, but also everything else that is going on in the MS world in terms of how we are, the new compounds, the new molecules that we have, and how it's looking. And, we can boil the ocean, as you said, Mitzi,
Mm,
but one little step at a time. And that's
absolutely.
what we're doing. We just keep our foot on the pedal to make sure that, the momentum continues.
Absolutely. Challenge, challenge, challenge. I love it.
challenge.
And ladies, listen, we could talk for another hour, but There's something else that's got to come on BDO after we're done. So I can't keep you another hour. But thank you so much for your time, your insights. It is always a pleasure discussing because we all have that same kind of fire to get the work done.
Yes.
And I'm
Yes.
just so honored to speak with both of you and to witness the amazing work that you're doing in your spaces. And I look forward to us having another discussion in the near future. I see lots of comments where people have been very excited about the conversation and seem like they've gleaned a lot.
Good.
The illustrious members of the panel tonight. So I want to thank you all. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Dr. Okai. I want to thank our sponsors, Biogen IDEC, for sponsoring, and of course, the Joy Life Foundation, which sponsors and powers the Brain Chat podcast. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night, and we will see everybody again in 2 weeks for our next topic about MS awareness. Good evening,
Thank you.
everybody.
you.
Right. Bye bye
Thank
now.
you. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Got it.